Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Friday, August 23rd. I don't know why I still have yet to figure out a better place to start than on Yu-Gi-Oh! Considering how I'm not really playing the game. But yeah, that's still there. So what I have been working on, just since there really is nothing to say about Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the trending chart version 2.0. I'm trying to move all of my scripting and news macros into 2.0, and so here is the full extent of my stupid 10 factorial error as far as trying to explode the top 100 games every time they're being sampled into having each game name repeated 100 times if it's in the first spot, 99 times if it's in the second spot, and so on and so on, which is 100 factorial as far as I can do the math. And yeah, it's just a super long line of code. It worked on a small sample size, and that's why I didn't catch that it wasn't going to work once I started using actually 100 things instead of just 3 samples. Skipping over that, I have replaced that with this chart, which you can see just has one small line here to sort and get the unique game names, and from that it uses this function to then match the unique game names that are in the A column to then repeat for, I believe it is 100 times, maybe 156 times, I think probably 156 times, all the way this way. Now, you may notice that is 2 lines of code that are way smaller, which means I'm probably doing it smarter and easier to adjust if adjustments need to be made. But you also notice as I scroll up here that there is a lot of zeros, and that will just be the case with the chart until a year or so goes by. As far as just sampling, I have run the macro to fill in the samples and do the form responses, and so I do have 4 spots here, and instead of repeating the name 100 times if it's in the number 1 spot, so Black Myth Wukong would have been repeated 100 times in the exploded thought, it simply just gives it 100 points, and it keeps the points separated, and so it is later on in the process, in the next step, that it starts to get summed up in the form of a chart. The next step is a blacklist that does effectively the same thing. It just eliminates things like OBS Studio and SoundPad that aren't programs, and then that gets to the big reveal of a stacked bar graph chart, which, yeah, I will show you in its final individual page form later. But with the first time I did it, the math was a little off. I had to make a little bit of a tweak, but now on the second attempt, or possibly the third attempt, I now have this exactly how I want it. So it is a chart that maybe I would at some point need to limit to just like the top 50, but it sorts whatever has the combined highest score. So Black Myth Wukong on the 4th day, which is this green, got 100. On the 3rd day got 100. On the 2nd sample day it got 100. And on the 1st sample day it got 100. So maximum score. 4 days that have been sampled, and it was in the first spot each time. That combined puts it at the highest peak of the stacked bar graph. If enthusiasm for Black Myth Wukong dies down, which it might, I did hear about 90% of all the players playing Black Myth Wukong are Chinese, so if they get finished with the game, you may see a very fast drop down, but when that drop happens will certainly affect things. If the drop happens 6 months from now, that's great news. If it happens in 2 days, that's terrible news. But yeah, so the bar graph will always slope and trend here. The one on the left will always be combined lower than the one on the right. But there are some examples here where Governor of Poker 2 on the second day was much higher on the list and now much lower on the fourth day, and non-existent, not even in the top 100 it seems, on the third day. So it is still somewhat questionable on the long run, looking over the course of a year, how this chart will look. How many different colors can it really cycle through? How squished will this all get? Will this be of any real relevance? It definitely is where we see these spikes, where a red is way higher than a red is, or blue is way higher than it, that we would see, oh, there was a peak of enthusiasm on these days. But eventually, too, there will just be colors on top of colors that entire games will fall off the chart. And so it will be over the course of a longer period. This does some, I think this relativism to it, which instead of just knowing the concurrent 24-hour peak of players, is probably helpful. And it does certainly weed out things like Pal World, which is somewhere on this list. Here it is. But Pal World isn't going to immediately have a huge spike in players and just be at the top of the chart forever like my previous chart, just because it had a massive amount of concurrent players for 1 week or 2 weeks. Things like Counter-Strike are going to, over the long haul, slide back into the first position, showing that there will be players consistently playing that. And I think that's about as much as we can get from any of these charts, because it is just such more of an opinion-based thing as far as who is actually excited or hyped about a game, or talking about games. If those smaller games are getting talked about by either mainstream video game journalists or by actual gamers, but they're just not getting a player base that's high enough to make into the top 100. And I'm just picking the top 100 because even collecting that much information is still a bit of time that it takes. So going to a second page and getting the top 200, top 300, top 1000, you could theoretically do that. It's going to just overwhelm you, certainly, and overwhelm Google Sheets, which is barely able to handle even this much information. Google Sheets is not particularly just a highly optimized database software, and Excel, I imagine, is pretty much the same too. You probably could have years and years of more permanent bits of information, but if you're doing calculations and formulas from that information, that's when it gets complicated. To the point, I have noticed that submitting the new information, it is taking a few minutes before the chart actually fills completely up, and resets itself with the new information. I did see this, and so I wanted to talk about this as a product and perhaps be a bit of a shill. If you've been following along with my channel, you know I've not been super enthusiastic about the Microsoft Xbox accessibility controller that Microsoft promotes, but actually they really just partnered with another company to make. Uh, I feel like, while this may be a device that's a little too small for many disabled people, this is probably your more realistic device from 8-bit though. It's a 2.4 gigahertz controller that puts right trigger and right bump and left trigger and left bump on the face of the buttons. It looks like there might even be some room here for some extra buttons. They are all in a line, and then some analog sticks down here. Now, compare that to a Steam Deck, you're still not getting touchpads, but touchpads wouldn't work with an Xbox device. Also, 8-bit does need receivers, but these receivers also tend to work with a PC and Nintendo Switches and things like that. All the buttons are programmable, and there are, let's see if we can scroll down here, you can plug it in and play it controlled. Now, immediately I can suspect that, yeah, it doesn't say this one is compatible with the PlayStation or the Switch. There's room for like a threaded screw mount on the bottom that I don't think it has, because they're not showing that off. And then there are some accessory connectors on the back. Now this isn't as many as the Microsoft one, which is way too big, but there's room for them to connect these two big buttons. Now, weirdly, this is pushed right up to this laptop as if it was plugged into the laptop, but it isn't. But yeah, you can map the buttons to do whatever you want, and I wish there was more of a thing there. And you can customize the stick. I just heard about this, so I really don't know all it can do, but here you can see the big buttons are fairly big, and since it is a 3mm mini stereo jack accessory connector that almost all accessory devices use, you could use almost certainly any other accessory device that you already existed. Compared to this one, they're calling them the super versatile buttons. You can see these buttons are way too big, and this device lets you plug in a lot more accessory controllers. And definitely you're going to have to customize any disability controller for each individual's disability. So in several cases, I imagine this device might be the right call, but in many cases I think this is the right call. Plus, you're getting so small, there's even a smaller version here, which I think this one may be for the Switch, that there is this possibility that if you have big enough hands, you could, with your pinky, hit the right bump and reach maybe even to the left D-pad up. You can see there's a button here, extra, button here, extra, button here, extra, button here, extra. Those could be page switch buttons. There's a headphone jack, which I guess adds something to it. Has a battery built in. But yeah, I would definitely think this is a nicer thought as far as just the size and on the possibilities as far as disabled people. I think this would work for a lot more people. See, yeah, look at just the scale here. It almost certainly you could put a pinky on the Y button and stretch to the D-pad and play one-handed, possibly with your palm or the middle of your hand. Yeah, the palm of your hand touching an analog stick if need be. If anything, the analog sticks might be better if you could remove them, because they might get in the way in that orientation. But yeah, at a certain level, the loss of ability of at least one hand is probably going to be a default assumption for needing a disability controller. Because if you have almost complete control of both hands, you can just use a regular controller. But yeah, it doesn't seem like there's a mount on the bottom, which would be helpful. But yeah, overall, this is also a product that is something you could get for a regular kid and they wouldn't be any big issue there. Here we can show that on Amazon it is selling for $60, where I believe the Microsoft accessibility controller is closer to like $120, $180. The devices are extremely expensive. Now, I don't know if you get the buttons included, but the picture would certainly imply that. So you're getting a really good deal at that point, because accessories, even though they really are just switches, tend to be way overpriced. One thing I would want to see is Nintendo Switch support, and yeah, PlayStation support. But yeah, I definitely feel like this is much more reasonable for particularly a kid that just maybe broke his hand, broke his wrist. Like somebody who's just temporarily disabled or minimally disabled, not somebody who is a paraplegic or is missing an entire arm, entire hand, where in that case I probably would still suggest the PlayStation controller, which we haven't heard anything new about. Also, if you're just big into fighting games, the reprogrammability on this and the ability to rotate this might get you a interesting orientation as far as a 6-button fighting game layout. It's not going to be a great fight stick by any means. Also, I would say people who have problems with triggers in general, you are losing a lot here compared to a regular controller, in that regular controllers nowadays are giving you like force feedback on some of the PlayStation controllers with the triggers, and analog inputs on the triggers where a half pull or full pull does something different. Although very few games actually engage with that because it's not consistent over all the different consoles and controllers that exist. I definitely can say I've never needed to use my ring fingers and pinkies, so the back trigger concepts are pretty rough, even on my Steam Deck. So something like this wouldn't really address any back triggers or give you buttons for back triggers as far as I can tell, unless you can map some of these buttons here to back triggers. But yeah, it being officially licensed for Xbox doesn't mean anything at all. I wish the mapping information was better. There is something on Amazon in this app where you can find included instruction manuals. But can I do that on the regular pages? No, I can't. This also addresses an issue, certainly, is that there is a point where the accessibility controllers for somebody who just broke their wrist was going to be in a cast for a few weeks. It's just too expensive, particularly since you're already worrying about the price of playing the paying for a cast and paying for doctors. There definitely is a room for a charity to rent out or loan out accessibility controllers to those types of kids. Things where it's short-term rental. 6 months at most, and then it's expected to be returned, or you take the deposit, something like that. If 8BitDo is selling a product for $60 instead of $180 or $120, a charity like that doesn't really need to exist anymore. It's a cheap enough controller. It's right in line with the price of just a regular Xbox controller that most parents who would have bothered could just afford to buy it. There is also a level here where if you wanted to have a precocious gamer get a really young kid into gaming, something flat where they can just press all the buttons is probably going to be easier to figure out than even a Nintendo Joy-Con with its triggers and its tilt mechanics. I imagine these don't have tilt mechanics. Here is the limited edition, the light special edition, which is even smaller, which definitely an adult hand could deal with that. It weirdly seems to only support iPads, Macs, Apple TVs, and the Switch. So the officially licensed, the officially Xbox licensed one can't support any of that, and probably contractually just can't support any of that. Whereas this one can support Android and Switch and Apple products of several different types. Interesting. But weirdly, that does then get into a weird system setup where this one does not have the accessory connections for the big buttons, and it can't work seemingly with a computer. So it's a weird mix match. Like, you say this is for gamers with limited mobility, but then you've got completely different features from the other products. On top of which, 8BitDo is also known for just other types of controllers and connections. Here's one specifically collection of accessories. They're supposed to plug into a keyboard that is NES themed, or if you want it to be NES themed. Here's a mechanical number pad. 8BitDo, definitely known for several different products and controllers, but fairly well known. And then at a certain level, as far as disability goes, you can have this small thing that you could take over, carry with you, and take over to a friend's house if you're disabled. But if you're really disabled, something like this would make a lot more sense. And I'm not sure that this fight stick has any 3mm plugs in it. No, it doesn't. So you would have to live with that as it is. What this really is highlighting is that there has been a long history of controllers that controller makers like 8BitDo have been making that are now coming to a junction point where it's making a lot more logical sense to have everything have a 3.5mm connector built into it, and have everything being built around the concept of having some level of expansion for accessibility. A lot of these controllers that are just being shown right now don't make sense to even exist or be sold, because they are just not what you should buy. The Xbox controller there is really the only kind of Xbox layout controller you should buy. The PlayStation controller from PlayStation should be the only PlayStation controller that you buy. Everything else should be more specialized, either as a fight stick for esports playing or as an accessibility. And frankly, like I said, fight sticks for esports playing should probably have accessibility options too. It's really not that much more expensive to add some 3mm connectors. You're talking $5-10 worth of connections. It's not expensive at all. Black Myth Wukong also has topped 10 million in sales. And then an Amazon boss has, what I think, I'm going to put an opinion out here, put his foot in his mouth by saying AI won't take away work because, quote, we don't really have acting. This is in the wake of a major strike still going on, which, yeah, the SAG-AFTRA strike still going on, not really getting reported on it. It's important to point out the reason why you don't hear about strikes very often is, yes, they go on and they're not that exciting, but also every single newspaper and news reporter is effectively owned and run by anti-union capitalists, and has been owned and run by anti-union crony capitalists, oligarchs for hundreds of years. Like, pretty much through the establishment of newspapers. Newspapers effectively from day one were created by rich oligarchs to promote ideas and thoughts that the oligarchs wanted poor people and other people to believe in and agree with. So there is a almost 100% bend that is anti-union in the reporting of news. Now, does that mean every news employee is anti-union? No, I imagine a lot of them, of the associate level employees, may want to be in the union or are in the union, but the editors, the owners, people that decide what stories get reported on, 100% there, pretty much anti-union. And so it doesn't get reported on through that censorship effort. To get back directly to this headline, this is just stupid. If anything, I think you could make a decent argument that video game voice actors and face actors are doing more acting than your average non-video game actor in a live action series, because there has been a fairly large growing problem of face actors that are in live action movies not really trying that hard or doing that good of a job acting. In Marvel movies, for example, when you're behind masks most of the time, you don't have to emote as much. You don't have to really say any lines with any real passion or anything like that. You just have to do a lot less compared to what we would call very hammy acting in the past, like Casablanca is probably the kind of acting you should think of. Is you have actors that are trying their very best to make their appearance and their face show the emotions of the things. The more classically theatrically trained style of actors who have to act and project their voices to the back room. We're getting less and less of that in Hollywood style of acting, and there is definitely an argument that we're getting more of that in video game acting, because you do have to, if your face is being scanned, focus on how you're reacting and emoting a lot more. And if you're just being heard as a voice actor, you have to focus more on getting the way your voice sounds a lot more to be more recognizable and more theatrical in its sound. And inherently, I think this also just highlights that Amazon, which is anti-union too, is full of a lot of execs who are setting themselves up for failure because they're trying to denigrate and devalue the workers that they already have, and instead of embracing the creative output that their actors, their workers could have. And we never really thought that Amazon Games was going to go anywhere, but this is just definitely another nail in its coffin as far as they don't respect their workers, obviously, so that's not going to lead to their workers wanting to work very hard for them. So yeah, those were the big news stories I wanted to talk about. As far as what else I worked on, here we are on SteamDB, but it looks very much different from what SteamDB usually looks like because I ran into it and modified all the custom style sheet for a black text on white background appearance, which I'm trying to thematically get all of the pages that I show to be on that same style. Now, in the process of doing this, I'm noticing that games like Banana here, there are going to be little issues also with what I've done. Tweaks would have to just constantly be made. But yeah, games like Banana here are expecting to be on a black background, or more accurately a blue background. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is tweaking the color palettes on all the pages and follow in the line of Steam, in that everything will just eventually have a blue background with white text, and that'll just be the theme for these streams visually to be consistent. But yeah, something closer to this. And yeah, I also spent a lot of time trying to see if I could use the custom style sheets to block elements, and it's just incredibly way easier to use uBlock Origin to block elements than it is to try to change the custom style sheets to block elements. It would be perhaps memory efficient if I could get it so I didn't have to use uBlock Origin on this page, but yeah, the amount of time to do that is going to just be way too high. There is still, in my opinion, far too many different colors going on here by its default color palette, and perhaps that appeals to more people than I realize to have all these colors. But I feel like the white here and the green here and the blue here are all just extra colors that really shouldn't exist. Also, I'd like to make this section smaller and make this font bigger, and possibly just make everything bigger, but I've struggled to figure out how to do that because that's actually not part of custom style sheets. That's actually part of the table HTML, and since it's not been established, it is effectively trying to keep each of these columns to be just about the same width. It should just be about exactly the same width for each, which doesn't work. And the only way that would work is if it was. No, it just doesn't work at all. But yeah, it is also questionable, since I just spent all the time changing how this page looks, whether I even need to stay on this page or show this page. This still is showing the 24-hour concurrent peak on Steam DB, which is still going up for Black Myth Wukong. And this is certainly showing the power, although it might very well be a false power of China, in that, yes, if China was a free market that was allowed to purchase and play any games at all that they wanted to play, then you would see a lot of game developers targeting that Chinese audience. And we've already seen a lot of game companies try to target the Chinese market and then fail miserably when the game just is not accepted by the Chinese government or is not accepted by the Chinese people. Take your pick. But yeah, it just doesn't happen very often. The state of Steam on behind the Chinese firewall might be incredibly small. There might be less than 20 games on the Steam client. So if one new game even shows up on the Steam client, it would have to be the game that all the Chinese people bought and played if they were going to buy and play anything. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's just straight up rumors floating around that your citizenship score or the Chinese government will be happy with you if you buy and play Black Myth Wukong. Of course, the playtime numbers on that would probably start to highlight some issues at that point. But yeah, overall though, the one thing my chart is not doing is looking at the peak players or the overall player base. It's giving up on that general thought and simply simplifying it to what is in the #1 spot, which means the millions of players / bots in between these two numbers are just simply ignored. And so this would get 100 points for today, this would get 99 points, and that's the scale. It also means that whatever this game is in the 100th spot still gets 1 point and will never get less than 1 point until this game falls below the 100th spot. There are still some games also that probably should be blacklisted just in the fact that they aren't really games. And something like SoundPad here might be something that streamers use all the time, and that's why it has a fairly high number of users, is that whoever is using it is just launching it and leaving it running on their computer. Deadlock still in very high numbers for a game that's not been announced. I wouldn't get crazy on the blacklisting though, and block something like Deadlock just because it's not out, because that doesn't really change enough to matter. And then this Mahjong Soul would have been the previous Chinese game to consider, and you can see its all-time peak of players has only been 40,000 players. So yeah, while Black Myth Wukong might have succeeded very well, not every Chinese game is going to make it to the top 1%. This Mahjong game has also succeeded very well to even be in the 79th spot. OBS is another program that streamers or anybody using OBS would use very often, but it's not fair to compare the number of people using the Steam version of OBS to gamers or people playing games. Supermarket Together is a new spin on that same supermarket game, I imagine. Although, weirdly, something like Cats, as just a clicker game with probably a ton of bots, is beating Supermarket Together. that must really hurt a lot of developers. That you have things, clicker games like Temple, just encouraging bots to run it, beating Cyberpunk 2077. Yeah. I also noticed on Slick Deals that a couple of games have been given away for free, which I grabbed one of them and the other one didn't look particularly that interesting. My other thought, though, is while I will still continue to process this page, if I stop showing it, I definitely should consider grabbing like all the links to all these videos. Yeah. Which are just the videos on the Steam page anyways. But if I grabbed them from this point, then I would just have this whole dynamically updating I'll be right back page. So instead of coming over to Yu-Gi-Oh! And showing the duel live whenever I run to the bathroom, the thought would be to put these trailers as actual commercials in the middle of a YouTube live stream, which is weird, certainly, to have to add commercials, but if there was one legitimate reason to add commercials, it is because of the stupid way YouTube works and the fact that I just often need to run to do something else or go to the bathroom. Most often it's just go to the bathroom. But yeah, ideally I would just be able to pause the stream or stop the stream and come back and make a new stream, but the algorithm totally just does not work that way. That would hurt my channel significantly more than just leaving the stream on, which is crazy to say. So here's the new chart in its full glory in its current place, and yeah, I have some issues with it as far as scale goes. The text here is not readable at all. It's far too small, and being slanted and being the way there is just a lot of gap here. Now, in fairness, this is after I made some tweaks, because the default has these scroll bars. Yeah. See, this is actually 100% of the scale would be here. So that's not right either. But yeah, there definitely is an argument here to potentially reducing the chart to a much more manageable top 50 games. And over time, the top 50 games may very well, in the first 6 months, be the same games, to the point where I'll just blacklist things like Dota or Counter-Strike 2. Just say, hey, these are games we already know about and that we know people are going to constantly play. So there's not really a lot of new information there. But yeah, even at its current level, top 100 is pretty unmanageable. Yeah, there's no way that I could find to make a legend that would make that more helpful. You can theoretically resize all these inside of Google Sheets, but it seems like it wants to keep the ratio the same. And again, the chart will always just scale this way. This will always be the most enthusiastically played game, and this will always be the least of the top 100 enthusiastically played games. And there will be points here, if this works the way I think it's going to work, where some game may be enthusiastically played for a week and it will stay on the chart even though other games have been played more recently. And yeah, a end of the year review might highlight showing this all the way, whereas a overall weekly review may be better to just show the top 50, maybe even the top 25. I could also seeing if we could get it to scroll from the left to right so that it could just keep on going. That might be helpful. Yeah, if you click on things, it will highlight that specific day, which doesn't work greatly if you click on everything. Yeah, overall I still feel like this is a much better chart than the line chart was doing, because at least this, once all the tweaks get done with it. Now, if I'm going to try and have everything look like Steam, the next step here is to adjust this chart to also have the blue background of Steam and white text, which that may not be that difficult. And the reason why I'm wanting to push everything into this Steam theme is because the pictures here are kind of your number one priority thing to show as far as screenshots go. So with that, if the pictures are being designed with the expectations of a blue background, everything should just have a blue background. Now I do still suspect eventually Steam will change to just a full black background anyways, and so I might jump the gun and do black background on white text, but it is also very stupid of me to bet on that thought, that opinion, and then just not act on the current situation, because I suspect some point down the line in the next decade Steam will go full black, more in the Steam Deck theme. Because yeah, pretty much you know that the Steam Deck theme is white and red with black backgrounds, black text on red in important parts. But even in that, when you highlight this, you get this hover of blue to the store ad. So yeah, it should act quicker and get it to look good quicker. And in the end, will that really change too much or improve my videos that much? And not as much as I'm hoping, I imagine, but it will probably do this. Here, our new and trending is Harem Ranch Life, which technically that is just what Stardew Valley was, with the slight variation that in Stardew Valley you had to be loyal to only one female romantic partner, where harem implies that you're going to have several girls. I don't even know if there is a reverse gendered version of the word harem, and I suppose, yeah, I do recall an Egyptian queen that had several young husbands, young boys in her harem. There is an imbalance of power certainly implied in the harem phrase. It's not just a case of all of the girls in the harem can also have their own harems of different boys. And in most of the times when you're talking harem, you're talking from a Japanese perspective, which is just all the girls are obsessively so much in love with the male protagonist that any jealousy they may have is overcome in sharing him with multiple female partners. Yeah, unfortunately, the free love movement really hasn't been embraced in the real world, so yeah, harems are a bit off from what you probably would want. There's some social thing built into almost every society about having some ownership of a person just because you're in a romantic engagement with that person, and that causes a lot of conflict. Of course, that has nothing to really do with video games. It just mostly is interesting to me that a harem game, once again on my logged in Steam front page, is still getting such enthusiasm around it that it's made it to the front page. So clearly there is a real desire for those types of stories and those types of games. Otherwise, there's nothing on Steam, so we should move forward. It might be very difficult for me to change this picture to be blue. So these interstitials theoretically should be in that same Steam blue background, black text style. I will have to play with that, although inherently these interstitial slides are also a kind of low priority. There might be a way to modify the hue of colors in the picture using either CSS or HTML, so I might be able to get it to be blue, but maybe not. Inherently black background on white is what I would want, and yet every news source I've followed is white background with black text, so I need to just invert everything. I do think dark mode makes a lot more sense for video games. Video games, when you're looking at screenshots, are typically more colorful and do stand out more on a dark screen. Yeah. And if anything, I guess if newspapers never existed, dark mode would probably be the default in most people's minds. Just paper being white with black on it is the default, because that was the cheapest way to make paper, is to bleach paper so it looked white. If it had been cheaper in the past to stain paper so it was pitch black, and then you would just write with some kind of chalk style pencil, it was white. Yeah, I think almost all web pages would be that way. Okay, so the headlines from Video Games Chronicles today says Sony's Tokyo Game Show 2024 presence includes an Astrobot gacha machine. There's still bits of work I need to do as far as the appearance of these pages too. Also, Kojima Productions confirms a Death Stranding panel from Death Stranding 2 panel for Tokyo Game Show, which there's quite a lot of Japanese people here, and then what looks like maybe one non-Japanese person is going to be on the panel. Which, I guess there probably was just some Japanese voice acting team for Death Stranding, but I definitely think of Death Stranding 1 as a Western game that first and foremost had Norman Reedus and Western voice actors, Conan O'Brien, all voicing characters. But yeah, I guess there was a localization team that did the Japanese voices for Death Stranding. The number one thing I would want to see on a panel like this is that it would be a completely different style of gameplay. Like the whole bouncing things and climbing things are elements that I just would not want to see returned to Death Stranding 2. The whole interconnected world and players having to work together concept, I think you throw that out the window too. I think you need a more traditional game that has more of a general appeal. Makes a lot of sense, because otherwise Death Stranding 2 is doomed to have a far fewer number of players. There was this major bump of interest in Death Stranding 1 because it was Kojima and everybody wanted to see what a post-Konami Kojima was going to make. But a lot of people were expecting something much closer to a Metal Gear Solid game, and they really didn't get anything close to that, so that audience probably was lost. And I imagine a lot of the curious people will not be curious for a sequel. I never really heard anybody say I've never really heard anybody say that they loved the gameplay mechanics of Death Stranding. Everybody was just talking about the craziness of the story. So here we have another quote from an Amazon Games boss. Is this the same one? Possibly in the same interview. Here the quote is, "It's a huge task," which using huge twice is probably too much. But he's claiming the next Tomb Raider is going well. Quote unquote going well is also a little under enthusiastic. So you have, it's a huge task and it's just going well, which that does not build a lot of confidence, frankly. And one would argue that a Tomb Raider game shouldn't be a huge task at all. It really shouldn't. You know generally what a Tomb Raider game should be, in the sense that it should be climbing and platforming and puzzle solving and shooting guns to some extent. So those are all fairly set in stone concepts, and then you just write an interesting lore croft, and you'll hopefully write an interesting bad guy into the story, and that really should be about it. I don't know if you inherently have to have a bow, although getting rid of the bow would be a confidence boosting decision, certainly, to say, hey, Lara Croft did not originally have bows, she had her twin guns. We're going back to the twin guns concept. Lara Croft always had platforming, so climbing and climbing hooks probably should stay. But if it was just a case that there was a major de-emphasis on climbing hooks and you weren't using climbing hooks as weapons in the next series of Lara Croft games, that would be more than acceptable. And her twin guns are the iconic parts of her, so giving her like assault rifles and other guns is not as much ideal either. And honestly, I don't know if you really need all of the RPG elements that some of the previous reboot games have had. I don't know if you need all the collectibles. There is probably too much momentum around the reboot trilogy in that we will just see a lot of collectibles that don't really need to exist, or a lot of puzzles. The last Tomb Raider game in that trilogy really was out of hand as far as just the currencies in the side games and the outfits, and it just really was a lot of grindiness for what was more of a weaker mainstream experience as far as if you were just to do the main storyline. In a funny way, the makers of the next Tomb Raider game should be looking towards something like Infinity Nikki, or even the Princess Peach Showtime game might be a bit of a reference. Metroid Prime also might be a good direction to go as far as just having it be more of a Metroidvania style game where you go back and forth through different areas once you unlock certain abilities, which none of the reboot games really had enough of that to justify going back and forth. The third game in particular, like, you went back and forth because you were trying to collect everything in the area. The whole hunting of animals concept makes some sense, but it wasn't very fun in the latest game either, because you were just hunting animals to get resources to craft things. But yeah, there's I guess a lot of pitfalls you can fall into with the next Lara Croft game, but also I just don't think it really should be that difficult. It probably is just a case of keep it simple, stupid. Just give us a simple, perhaps slightly smaller on scale, Tomb Raider to evoke the size and the style of the original Tomb Raider games, and start there and work your way towards a bigger, better game series. So Randy Pitchford here being, I think, shown in a picture from, I think, quite a while ago, has managed to be mostly silent for the entire duration that the Borderlands movie was in production, and seems like as soon as the Borderlands movie came out to great failure, he is now getting reported on more as being quoted on things, although so far he hasn't said anything too incredibly stupid. This is really just him commenting on something stupid he said in the past. Part of the thing here, Randy Pitchford, who, it's important to point out, probably has no authority at Gearbox anymore at all. Gearbox is owned by 2K. I think 2K, for the most part, had the Borderlands series directly under their control anyways, and so he mostly had stepped away from Gearbox as far as the game company, and was running Gearbox, the film production company, which I think was called Gearbox Films or something. So, I mean, technically he may be CEO, but I'm not sure he really has that much authority. But he had this desire, or at least he was fronting that he had this desire that the Epic Games Store was the future, and that there would be these game store wars between the Epic Games Store and Steam. And so now people are making fun of him because Borderlands 4 has been announced for Steam. He apparently at some point predicted the store's Steam's death. The quote here is, "My long-term hopes regarding Epic's store were misplaced. In fairness, I imagine he's not alone in that. I imagine a lot of game CEOs and game publishers and game managers wanted to see the Epic Game Store succeed so that they would get more money, either directly from the Epic Game Store or from the Epic Game Store just taking less of a cut. This was made in 2019, and it's kind of just ridiculous to hold somebody to something they said back then, saying that Steam could be a dying store. I mean, you could say the exact same thing here, in that Steam today could be a dying store, but it may just be an incredibly slow death. Borderlands 3 was an Epic Game Store exclusive. Borderlands 3 notably not as well received and not as well played, and clearly 2K and Gearbox are not going to make that same mistake a second time. But yeah, it's kind of pointless to hold them to this. If you really believe in the idea of competition lowering the price or increasing the services that a consumer gets, you would still want to support some competition with Steam and not just see Steam be the de facto monopoly that it is. But frankly, every single industry I've ever seen that has multiple competitors is not getting better. It's maybe getting more slower. You might make that argument, but I just don't think competition really works these days. It's too easy. There's too many people, and boycotts don't work well enough. So yeah, in fairness to the Epic Game Store, has just really done a very bad job of being a good competitor. If I was in charge of the Epic Game Store, I would say, hey, our storefront is not working the way it is, so let's rethink everything, reevaluate everything, and see how we could do a relaunch of the Epic Game Store to make this make more sense. Probably I would get rid of the free games giveaway. It's been going on long enough, and clearly they're not going to bring in new players. So let's make something that gamers would be attracted to as to why they would want to play their games on the Epic Game Store. You have an opportunity here, certainly, where all of a sudden the Epic Game Store is going to be available in the European Union on iPhones. So think of the Epic Game Store as an iPhone marketplace and promote that. Promote features that make sense around that. If all of a sudden the Epic Game Store is your one stop for all the games you get on Android or iPhone and PC, that makes some more sense. But you really need to attract the gamers and not try and attract the publishers, who really were just being attracted by getting a lower cut. But yeah, as far as Randy Pitchford, he's a magician. Puffery is not that big of a deal, not that uncommon from magicians or politicians, and frankly I wouldn't be surprised if he actually does go into politics at some point. But yeah, so him saying something in 2019 is not that big of a deal. The bigger issue around Borderlands 4 is certainly is it just going to be a good game, or it has the actual team, the writers, the developers, the programmers at Gearbox, or whoever is going to make Borderlands 4, have they just lost the mojo that they once had with Borderlands 1 and 2? Is it possible that there really was only a small period of time in which Borderlands was going to work as a concept? one of the things you might make an argument around Borderlands is that Borderlands in a lot of ways was somewhat like Diablo 2 in a time when Diablo 3 wasn't out and Diablo 4 wasn't out. Now that we do have a Diablo 3 and 4, it might be a case that the audience for the constant loot churn that happens in Borderlands games and Diablo games is being split, and that there just isn't a growing audience there of people who want to get guns or items of any sort and just trade them out over and over again. Yeah, looter shooter may just not be a growing fan base. Moving on, the Callisto Protocol developers have a spin-off called Redacted. They have some launch plans for it, and the announced trailer here shows a very different game. It is top-down isometric, it's bright and colorful, it isn't really anywhere as spooky and dark as the Callisto Protocol game looked. And yeah, in a lot of ways it looks a lot like Borderlands. Which, you know, I heard somebody use a phrase to describe that art style. I've always called it the thick black outline comic book style. But they were calling it shaded, as I think was the phrase people were using. But yeah, I think comic book style still makes a lot more sense in my mind. So my assumption here is that the developers, who I'm not even sure they are still working with the same guy who initially proposed Callisto Protocol. It seems like they just had another game in development and decided to say it was in the Callisto Protocol universe, or they sized themselves up and said, hey, we can't really make a good 3D game, 3D horror game, let's make something that's smaller scale that we probably can make. Of course, if this game also ran very poorly, then that's just going to be a real bad statement on those developers. It is kind of funny though that they're even saying it's in the Callisto Protocol universe, but I guess there's still enough people reporting on and talking about the Callisto Protocol that it makes sense. But I would suspect if Redacted did very well, you would see them stop emphasizing that it's in the Callisto Protocol universe and instead just call it Redacted 2 and put it in the Redacted universe. In the same way that I could see you saying that Alan Wake and Control are both in the Control universe instead of saying they were in the Alan Wake universe. Multiverse, whatever you would say in that case. Whatever the newest game, most successful game would be, which still probably would be Control. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the card game Surging Sparks, is coming in November. This set is going to feature over 250 cards. This is interesting, seeing all these gems float around. Now, is this really video game related though? I wouldn't really say it is. That being said, October, I believe, is the date. I think it was October 9th that the Pokemon trading card mobile game, new one, is coming out. And I do have to certainly say with some warning that parents should be careful about whether they want to let their kids get into it, because it definitely looks to me like it is very focused on being a pack opening simulator more than a proper card game where you could be free to play. And yeah, if your pockets are not full of cash, it might be better not to get your kids into the Pokemon games. mobile game. There is certainly also a timing there, as far as let's just assume you're a parent that isn't raising your child immediately on an iPad, and you're not giving iPads to your 2-year-olds. There is this split here where kids that would be into Pokemon probably are in the 7-8 years old range, maybe 9 or 10. But then kids that should be getting cell phones probably should be a lot older than that. In particular, in the United States, the schools systems have all different kinds of rules for each independent school district as far as who can have a cell phone, as far as in school at all. Which, if a kid can't have a phone in school, it's kind of pointless to give them a phone in most cases. But then there is also just some school districts that are somewhat embracing it, some that say you can have it in between classes, some that say you can have it in your free periods, some that say you can only have it before and after school, some that say you can't have it at all, and if we see it at all, we're going to just take it away. And yeah, there's all kinds of different systems there, and who knows if the rules are even going to stay consistent year to year. So it does create this weird situation about when should you get a kid a phone. Technically, if you're getting a kid a phone, they need to be over, like, I think it's 12, maybe 14, due to like the laws in the United States to have an email account, and so to have like an email account to own an Android, or have an email account to own a iTunes account. So yeah, there's just some weirdness on the inconsistency of the law there and what reality really is. But yeah, once you get over all those issues and you say, okay, a kid can have a phone, then you're giving a kid a phone, and then they are probably too old at that point, if they're 12 or 13 or 14, to want to play Pokemon, the trading card game. If anything, they'd be into their first phase of nostalgia around playing the Pokemon card games. Although that might change. Pokemon card game might just still be super popular even in those age ranges too, but I wouldn't think it would be. I think they'd be moving over to something closer to Yu-Gi-Oh! Or even maybe Magic the Gathering, or something brand new. Moving on with the news from Video Games Chronicle, Avowed has more than 10 different endings, Obsidian claims. Which, okay. That sounds to me like they're building up a shorter game that they're going to try and encourage you to play multiple times. Otherwise, you're promoting the fact that if you play the game once, you're missing out on 9 different endings. But yeah, we'll see. There was another announcement, and I'm not sure I'm going to have a trailer here, for a Heroes of Might and Magic new game, which honestly doesn't look like it's more than just a slight update to Heroes of Might and Magic 3, but that's kind of all anybody wants. The funny thing there is that I believe they made a Heroes of Might and Magic 4 and 5. This one does not have a number after it, and it's been a while. That there is always just this problem that there's nostalgia around Heroes of Might and Magic 3, but the games are so long that they don't really have a way to be played in modern times. And the graphics look nice and everything looks improved, but it is very much a strategy game that might just surprise you, because by the name alone it doesn't sound like a strategy game. Nintendo is ending service for another mobile game, Animal Crossing. A new version of Pocket Camp will launch in November to preserve save data. It is, I believe, an offline single-player experience. it doesn't sound too different from what you would call just a maintenance mode game. Technically my previous favorite mobile game, Destiny Child, did that, where you could transfer the online gacha components. That they took out all the online and all the purchase components and left a memorial edition of the game where you could just look at the progress you made up until the point that the game shut down. But yeah, this is something that not all games do, certainly, but they are at least throwing you a bit of a bone. Although there's a long history now of Nintendo mobile games not succeeding. Notice that there's a difference here between the Nintendo mobile games and the Pokemon Company mobile games. I don't really see how Nintendo could have succeeded in the mobile market while also having the same amount of focus on the Nintendo Switch. The one thing they would have had to do is give up exclusivity, and I just don't think they would have wanted to do that. If there was a way to convince them to give up exclusivity, then I think a lot of people would be buying Mario Odyssey on the iPad and playing it there instead of buying a Switch. And Nintendo is the one company that probably is still making profits for every Switch being sold. But yeah, they never really could find a way of making mobile games that would be a funnel to move players to playing the Switch. And with the next Switch 2 being announced, I don't imagine too much is going to be different there. It would certainly be interesting if the next Switch could play Android apps and you could just sideload the Android apps, but that's probably not going to happen. Even if it could happen, it probably wouldn't be very good of an experience. I can see a lot of parents saying, hey, I don't want to get my kid a phone, but they can play Angry Birds on this Switch 2, and I'll sideload Angry Birds onto it. But yeah, if Nintendo did that, they'd almost certainly charge some kind of unlock fee for every app you installed and sideloaded. They'd make you buy some kind of Nintendo coins and spend Nintendo coins on it. Even the emulation thought on mobile is something they really didn't want to embrace. So yeah, I don't know what they could have really done there. Just have one app that connects friends so you can do chat and things on a second screen on a cell phone. Or that's about it. They could have made an app that showed old like Mario cartoons. Something like that. And here you can see they're saying like Super Mario Run is still active, but it's not like they've really added anything or promoted it. And that's just a larger statement certainly on the failure of mobile games in general. Very few mobile games are really good or worth playing. The only reason you're playing them is because you don't have a console in your hands. It would make a lot more sense to have a streaming service where you could stream your games from a Switch 2 to your cell phone and play that way. Something like Moonlight works on the Steam Deck for your Steam PC. That makes a lot more sense. Samsung also showed off a stretchy screen where the micro LCDs are so small at this point that they won't just shatter in the different layers. One would assume it doesn't have regular glass on it that you could stretch the screen. But the stretchiness probably is not going to be that far. So it would probably take decades before we got to the idea that you would have like a 5-inch cell phone screen that you could then stretch outward to turn into a 7, 8, 9, 10-inch screen. The unrolling screen concept right now makes a lot more sense, and the folding screen concept makes a lot more sense. But the Samsung screen technology definitely is moving towards a direction in that devices will be small in your pocket and big in your hands. And that would be great. Although at some point we might just get hologram projectors or projectors of some other sort, and then the screen element may not be that important, or augmented reality glasses, or just something that plugs directly into your brain. Moving on with the news, Sea of Thieves has reportedly surpassed 1 million sales on the PS5. Next week's free Epic Games Store title is leaked. Yep, leaking kind of doesn't really even matter. Callisto Protocol is going to be one of the games, so they still are trying to promote it to some level. And at a certain point, I guess you don't have anything else you can do, so yeah, try and promote it. BioWare has detailed Dragon Age the Veilguard's PC features, which we don't see a ton of these kinds of announcements where you have just like full-on features being shown off. And increasingly, I think that's because a lot of people are realizing that people aren't buying new video cards or building new PCs just for these features. Like high dynamic range is probably one you would want to keep an eye out for. VSync is one to keep an eye out for, but I have no idea even what NVIDIA Reflex is, and deep learning super sampling 3 frame generation is something that might help you get higher frame rates, but if you have something that's powerful or powerful enough to render this game, then ideally you wouldn't want to have to use that. And then dynamic resolution scaling you definitely don't want to use unless you have to. Ray tracing is still somewhat of a question as far as can your video card control that. There's a decent chance that even ray tracing won't be fully embraced by the next generation of consoles, and that's not including the Switch 2, just the PS6 and the next Xbox. I wouldn't be surprised if ray tracing is still something that is being experimented with by a lot of games and not fully embraced. Hyper Light Breaker has been delayed yet again. Modern Warfare 3 and Warzone Season 5 Reloaded patch notes were released as the update goes live. Some of these might be older stories. Yeah, the new Xbox accessibility product revealed, including the adaptive joystick. Yep, again, while I do like the idea that you can 3D print this and have different thumbsticks, it's not something that I think is going to be worth the price. It is very much a different approach to, this is a terrible screenshot, but you have 4 buttons and the jump stick, and then you have 2 bumps, not really triggers. This one does have a screw mount on it, which might be way more important than you think. But I also don't think that this adaptive joystick works separately. I think you have to plug all of this into the big adaptivity control box. EA Sports College Football 25 overtakes Helldivers 2 as the best-selling game in the US. Which, okay. Now, this does point out an interesting thing. I just realized I've never seen a sports game on the SteamDB Top 100 charts. So, there is almost certainly a significant number of gamers that are console gamers that play sports games. Yeah. The gamer bros, I would assume, is most of that community. So, yeah, Steam has kind of failed miserably in that aspect. That's something that Valve might want to look into, is how can you get the gamer bros to come to PC, and it's going to be a tall order because inherently, I imagine, the people who just want to play EA Sports College Football 25 probably don't want to build a computer or deal with computers, and probably just want their game to work on a console. And as long as that audience stays large, which clearly it is still staying large, console sales will still stay around. And then there was these new Lego Animal Crossing sets. This highlights how Nintendo is just not really consistent with its release schedule too, in that Animal Crossing mobile game is getting replaced with a inferior version of the mobile game. Meanwhile, the Lego set is coming out next year. Phil Spencer says there's going to be more change when he's talking about the Indiana Jones coming to the PS5. What I hadn't realized about this story, though, is that Indiana Jones is coming to the PS5 like 6 months after being exclusive on the Xbox. So there still is this timed exclusivity that it's going to have. And if anything, that probably indicates that Xbox Phil Spencer was going to get on the stage at Gamescom and announce something else that got delayed. And so instead they have announced something that's not really that important and that could have been just been assumed by the gamers that eventually it would come to the PlayStation. If you're going to assume that they were going to announce something different, then the first next step to that assumption would be that it would have been something different related to Indiana Jones, like, oh, it's out right now, or we've got some other Indiana Jones related DLC to announce, or something like that. If that assumption doesn't fit, then you do have to assume that some other game like Perfect Dark was going to get more of a trailer or a show off, which that would have made a lot of sense, really. And show off another trailer and announce a release date for Perfect Dark instead of showing off a trailer and announcing Indiana Jones coming to PS5. But yeah, maybe this was also a negotiated things where PlayStation demanded he get in on stage at Gamescom and make the announcements, which I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft doesn't really care as much as far as making announcements at Gamescom, because they've got several other stages and Xbox Directs which they can make announcements otherwise. Alright, and that's going to bring us to the Gamatsu.com articles. Squirrel with a Gun for PS5 and Xbox Series launches October 15th. Metaphor ReFantasio has a Travel Beyond Fantasy trailer. One of the things I was working on just before I started streaming is how I'm redoing the macro to open up all the news for Gamatsu, and it's going to be a little bit different because the macro inherently is looking for the title bar, the thing that's usually at the top left of a window, name whatever the title of that HTML page is. Well, in Gamatsu's case, page 1 of the list of news versus page 2 of the list of news have the exact same title. So fortunately it shouldn't be a problem as long as everything is just opened in the same order every time, but the whole system needs to be on page 3 if the link is on page 3 that it's going to click on later, not page 2 or page 1. The other ones tend to have a different page number in the title. This Komatsu does not. If it became a real problem, excuse me, I could use yet another extension to change the title bar to have the direct URL in the title, and then that would solve that problem real quick. But I don't think it will be an issue. It's just more programming. And a lot of the programming I'm doing is very much a case of working on it for 5 minutes and then getting distracted looking at my phone and then coming back. It's not really just hardcore locking down in a chair programming. I did this to myself certainly by having my computer on TVs 8 feet away, where if I was going to do proper programming I would be at a desk with the monitors right in my face, sitting in the chair. Let's see, Co-Robo crowdfunding reaches the console version's stretch goal. So, I've not heard of this game, Co-Robo. Oh yes, this is the spiritual successor to Chibi Robo. So theoretically, it's been funded now that it would show up on modern consoles. It is still very hard to put a lot of faith in Kickstarter games. And this one's kickstarting on 2 different sites, Campfire and Kickstarter. I would like to see this game made, but also I don't think Chibi Robo actually sold particularly that well. So this is very much a niche game for a niche audience. So hopefully the money doesn't just dry up and you get a very small game or you get nothing at all. That is always the problem with, or the danger with, kickstarting anything. There probably should be tighter constructions around funding, getting individuals to donate their money to fund such large projects that have just such a high amount of risk. But any laws that once were like that have long since been eroded. Moving on, Ace Attorney Investigations Collection demo is now available. You can apparently play the beginnings of each game. Is this a assassination that happened here? Odd choice of a screenshot, I guess. PlayStation Mina Hero Project Incubator Program has been announced. This will be supporting developers in the Middle East and North Africa region, which we had kind of talked about this before. Yeah, and I guess there was some thought there that maybe things are getting to be a little bit more stabilized and that a Japanese company like PlayStation can really support those countries and have companies in those countries make games, and maybe the games they make can somehow come out and be interesting to the rest of the world, despite those countries typically having strict censorship rules and laws. We shall see. I imagine a lot of the enthusiasm that was put around Chinese game developers may now be shifting towards MENA countries and India in general, which I don't think India really would fall under the Middle East category. Meanwhile, I think I just heard a statement that the Taliban somewhere just made it illegal for women's voices to be heard singing or reading. So yeah, you have drastic cultural differences there from the rest of the world. Moving on, Sony Interactive Entertainment announces a preliminary Tokyo Game Show 2024 lineup schedule. If this is what Tokyo Game Show is going to look like, and this isn't just a screenshot from Gamescom, I would be very surprised, because that is a really large stage for Tokyo Game Show. I do think Tokyo Game Show should probably have a giant stage like that and be just a bigger event overall, but in the end I also think Tokyo Game Show does not want to be invaded by a bunch of foreigners coming to see presentations there, and so they are inherently going to be limited by just Japanese people and the number of Japanese people you can get to show up at the Tokyo Game Show, which is not going to be anywhere as big a number. And Gamescom in Cologne, Germany is effectively encouraging everybody in all of Europe to show up, and the E3 events back when they existed was encouraging everybody in all of North America to show up. Yeah, the population of Europe and the population of North America vastly higher than Japan. PlayStation presents Death Stranding 2 on the Beach special stage has been set for Tokyo Game Show 2024. So yeah, Nicholas Winding Refn. It's quite the name. Capcom announced its Tokyo Game Show 2024 lineup and schedule. Let's see if we can zoom in here. Monster Hunter Wilds. This is the, what's it called? DRDR. Dead Reckoning? Well, it's a remake of this game. Guy with the camera running around the mall with the zombies. Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster. Okay. Then they have the Capcom Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection. And then we have a purely Japanese game here, which is an Ace Attorney game collection. And I think this might be an... no, it's not a Naruto game. Something called Path of the Goddess, subtitled Path of the Goddess. And then Street Fighter 6. And Monster Hunter Now. Now, why did I do that when I probably could have just scrolled down here and figured that out? Yeah. Kunitsu Gami Path of the Goddess is the name of it. That was a dumb move on my part. I should have just scrolled down and seen if the text was there. Apologies for that. Now, what's funny about that Dead Rising image is it frankly doesn't really look like it's anywhere close to the new art style. It looks like it may just be the same image from the cover originally. Moving on, Raging Loop is coming to the PS5, Xbox Series, and Xbox One on August 30th. Synduality Echo of Ada closed network test has been set for September 13th to the 16th. Here we have Heroes of Might and Magic, the Olden Era. Now, Olden Era might just be a way of saying, hey, this is us once again doing Might and Magic 3, but not really saying that. That being said, if these are supposed to be the hero classes in the Olden Era, these feel like they might be slightly different. And that you have like a Medusa, a Ghoul, a maybe Goblin, Angel, Demon, doesn't seem like there's really a human factor. While the visuals definitely look like they've been improved, in a lot of ways, there's not much you can improve compared to Heroes of Might and Magic 3 until you start changing things. And that's inherently, I don't think, what anybody really wants. Like, there are 3 screens in Heroes of Might and Magic 3 of importance. There's the screen here, which is the overworld map, where you will have a certain number of steps. I'm not sure if, I don't remember if you roll a dice or not. When you click on a monster and walk to a monster, you fight them. When you click on resources, you collect resources. There definitely is some room that if you clicked on a cave, maybe you might be surprised with a fight or resources. Although I don't think Heroes of Might and Magic 3 really worked that way. I think you were consistently always in the case that you were just collecting resources. Now, if you think about modern games, as far as resource management games, you would have employees that you would summon to go to the mine and mine, or go to trees and chop down trees. Even in the era of Heroes of Might and Magic 3, you would have had games where you sent people to mine and chop down trees, and yet this game did not have it. That you just played as a hero that had some kind of army, and eventually you were building up your castle strong enough that you could usually take out your opponent's castles, which were not usually humans, because the online component, while big there, would have also been during a time when most people didn't have internet. As far as the other screens, you have screens like this, which are very pretty, but all you do on these screens in the Heroes of Might and Magic 3 equivalent is you click on each building, and on each building you can typically upgrade the buildings if there are any upgrades left, and you can summon enemy troops. And the actual gameplay mechanic, these are all just different styles of cities. An Necropolis for undead, a demonic one, the other one was an angel one. This looks like this is the underwater one, so this might be the Medusa one. But your actual gameplay mechanic is this screen, where you have usually 5 hero troops that you move forward and attack. There are 5 troops, and each troop represents often ridiculous numbers of individual troops. So while you may only see one character, they may represent 1,000 skeletons, and you'll see one skeleton, which all of that is fairly simplistic by modern standards. Sometimes the characters may have been able to do different kinds of spell attacks. Yeah. The gameplay loop. There were some times where you'd have quests that you were looking for specific items, but the gameplay loop is fairly simplistic in Heroes of Might and Magic 3, and just needs someone willing to try to embrace the nostalgia on the good parts, but also try and evolve it. You can just see piles of wood sitting around for early game speed ups, piles of food sitting around. Here's a city. In a funny way, Heroes of Might and Magic 3 might take so long that it would make sense to play it on a cell phone more than a computer or console. But the mouse controls are pretty exclusive. You could cast spells too, that was the other thing. But yeah, particularly on this trailer, which I'm now just going to show the whole trailer, they're not really showing anything more than possibly a new set of troops and a new set of heroes. Which, at a certain point, if you can squeeze all the content, which there's way too much content in Heroes of Might and Magic 3, into this new game with 5 new hero classes, and then add the old hero classes, then you're adding new content. But it's not what they're really promising right now. Sorry about that, just threw a third cup of water. Now I'm out of water for the stream. Yeah, it's certainly a tall order to try and make this work. I hope it does work, but they've tried 2 times before with 4 and 5. And it's probably worth pointing out that this is Ubisoft publishing it. So it's very possible Ubisoft is going to put very little effort into this or very little money into it. That's why I was more enthusiastic around Clash of Heroes of Might and Magic as just a whole new series that makes more sense to make something a little bit more modern as far as a simplistic concept. And I would frankly be happier if a Clash of Heroes of Might and Magic 2 got released, which I think maybe they announced they were going to make it 2, but I haven't heard anything about it in a long time, so I may have just dreamed that up instead of them going back to the well to try and make a new Heroes of Might and Magic. But then they should also experiment with making a new Heroes of Might and Magic. It's a series that deserves an attempt every now and then. Of course, yeah. Who knows? We'll have to just wait and see what happens, I guess. I definitely loved Heroes of Might and Magic 3 in the old days, but I couldn't even really recommend like my nieces and nephews to play it. It's just too time consuming and too old of a style of game. It just doesn't have enough relevancy, whereas playing something like Warcraft or Starcraft still might make some sense because you could go through all the single player content there fairly quickly. Heroes of Might and Magic is a game that would benefit from an abridged version, but it would definitely take some thinking as far as how can you make an abridged version of Heroes of Might and Magic. One of the major problems with it is that it really was just a map maker and editor, so people were just making giant maps and putting items in certain spaces. And if you were to boil down every single mission to just a small synopsis of what happens in that mission and make a new game to just do what that small synopsis said, each mission would be 20 minutes long, whereas in Heroes of Might and Magic 3, each mission is taking 3, 4, 5 hours to play just because of all the grindiness and the slowness of it. Yeah. It may very well also be more of a niche product than I realize. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. Eternal Strands launches in early 2025 is the next Gematsu article. Which, not sure I've heard anything about this game. Screenshots look good, but that may not really mean too much. Inherently, it's very easy to make a good looking screenshot, which makes it shocking how many bad looking screenshot games exist and get released on Steam. Snow Brothers Wonderland launches November 28th worldwide. Guess for the PlayStation 4 and 5 and Switch. Not coming to the Xbox, not coming to PC apparently. The first Berserker Kazan deep dive trailer, weapons, action, and combat is available on Gematsu if you want to check that out. This might be a sleeper hit when it comes out. It might be a surprise hit. Sleeper hit might be the wrong phrase. Life is Strange Double Exposure Powers Unveiled trailer is available. Squirrel with a gun. We talked about. I think I ran the macro twice because my curation function, I think, was slightly broken. I don't know how it was working at all, frankly, if it was so broken, but apparently it was. So we've got several spots here where these would have been the Steam pages getting moved around. So yeah, many of these games are coming to Steam, and so I should make YouTube shorts around them. Now, I have no idea how the curate function was working at all, because it had an unclosed loop, which is about the one thing that should have caused it to crash immediately. We're getting some duplicates here as far as this. I still haven't installed the anti-duplicate tab function. I should. I don't think that extension was ever that big of a deal. Because, yeah, I don't think it took up that much RAM. I can see it just went over and duplicated every single Gamatsu article and every single Steam page then referenced in those Gamatsu articles. Let's open the second time. This is the kind of thing that needs to stop happening on these streams, is duplicates and wasting everybody's time, wasting my time, wasting the viewers' time. I do recognize it as a problem. It's just a matter of me getting around to fixing it. You would kind of think that Firefox would stop duplicates, but it weirdly doesn't seem to have any function for that. Leaving that to extensions. I swear this eventually ends. It shouldn't go around the third time. There we go. So that brings us to the GameDeveloper.com story headlines. Here we have Randy Pitchford saying Borderlands 4 Steam release isn't the end of the PC store wars. Okay, whatever. I feel like this is Randy Pitchford just doubling down or saving face, and I still feel like this is people asking him questions more than him offering unpopular opinions. And I don't really agree that there should be just a growing hate for the Epic Games Store, or a our side versus their side mentality against the Epic Games Store. Just let it exist. Who cares? Steam reviews are now going to reflect if the game was played on the Steam Deck, which is interesting because What happens if you play the game half the time on the Steam Deck and half the time on the PC? Let's see. Yeah, I guess it's going to be listed on playtime under a little triangle, but there's no way to see user reviews, sort them by handheld or PC, which that's probably going to come eventually. And I certainly could see how that's useful, but in the contrast, it does highlight an issue in that most PC reviews for a game on Steam could be running on completely different hardware from what you have. So somebody with an underpowered Chromebook playing a game on Steam, their review is treated exactly the same as somebody who has a $5,000 PC gaming rig. And yeah, that could potentially be an issue. Although, honestly, it's more of an issue for the game developers not optimizing their games. So let's just focus on that more than anything, I guess. The fact that Steam Deck playtime is being reflected here also definitely highlights that Steam as a storefront, the teams that work on the storefront, are also enthusiastic around the Steam Deck, and momentum around the Steam Deck is still continuing, although very quickly at some point SteamOS 4 is going to come out, and then at that point I think everything that says Steam Deck will just say SteamOS, because the thought that they've said with SteamOS 4 is that it's going to come out and support their ROG Ally and other handhelds. So at that point, the hardware known as the Steam Deck will be de-emphasized over the operating system, which I'm okay with that, but I also want to see Valve continue to make Steam Decks. I do want to see a Steam Deck 2 actually exist. There's still room for improvement on this hardware. There's still room for experimentation on this hardware, and I don't think we're going to find an ROG Ally type device that just takes the touchpad concept and does it better. So far, the significant number of people who have ROG Allies and Steam Decks, very few of them have decided to put SteamOS via Bazzite Linux on their ROG Ally, and very few of them have decided to put Windows on the Steam Deck. So there's still a lot of beta experimentation going on. And I very much would say the Steam Deck is very beta. And yeah, it's updating fairly consistently. Everything needs work. Waydroid on SteamOS needs as much polish as it possibly can get to feel like it just always works. A new update just was launched to try to get it where you can select whether you want the operating system to be in portrait or landscape mode, since rotation doesn't work on it. Let's see. Moving on, the CMA, I'm not sure which one this is, has closed its years-long investigation into Apple's in-app payments. The inquiry may be closed, but the UK regulators will keep a close eye on Apple and is more than ready to reopen the probe at any time. This would be the UK Competition and Markets Authority. Yeah. In the UK. Animal Crossing Pocket Camp is being shut down in November, then reopened as a paid game. Oh, is that how it's going? That's even worse. So the free-to-play version of the game is going away, and then they're making people pay if they want to keep playing. But then it does get rid of subscription services and in-app purchases, so maybe the audience will appreciate that more. Yeah, it's a bold move, certainly. I'll be interested to see how it works, how it's received. And then Virtuous acquires the co-developer Third Kind Studios. And then there's a survey that says spotty preservation efforts risk significant loss for the Australian game industry. Or maybe the survey is asking that question. It's believable. A recent study from the National Film and Sound Archives highlights the troubles facing game preservation efforts and how it intersects with Australia's industry scene. Still haven't fixed that. Yeah, I hinted, or I suggested and speculated that this was the case. Now it has been confirmed. Turns out Dying Light the Beast started out as leaked Dying Light 2 DLC, which, yeah, pretty obviously it was going to be Dying Light 2 DLC at some point, but Dying Light 2 didn't sell that well, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's 2 or even 3 pieces of DLC that get sold as standalone side games. I'd like to see this become a trend, frankly, in that we get less DLC and more standalone side games where you don't have to own the base game if the experience is not really being changed much, if the base game experience isn't being changed that much. Far too often we've allowed for there to be DLC that takes place in a completely different region with a completely different character, and nothing you do goes back to the main game, which there's a real issue there, certainly. Even some of the really good Borderlands DLC runs into that problem in that you go into like Tiny Tina's DLC and I don't think you really get that many items or that many guns from that DLC. No, there was one Borderlands DLC where you were just unlocking vaults, and the vaults were giving you 1 or 2 pieces of equipment, and that was it. Phil Spencer says Indiana Jones PS5 jump is good for Xbox's health. I don't know why the headline here just is so blocky. I would suspect the font here is not dynamic in that case. There might be a case for GameDeveloper.com that I just need to squish everything down a little bit to the left and then zoom everything bigger and just tweak things that way. Microsoft unveils a new accessibility hardware, including the Xbox Adaptive Joystick. Again, this would be an example of maybe instead of stretching out the image, I should just squish the images and squish everything. A lot of it comes down to just how long are the headlines always going to be. I can't imagine anybody wanting to use that layout. Some of these layouts I don't think actually make a lot of sense. And inherently it's also worth pointing out that the fact that you can 3D print the heads does not give the manufacturer an excuse to not include all the heads in the purchase, because it is certainly an unfair burden that you're disabled and you're buying this accessibility controller, and oh, by the way, you're now expected to own and know how to operate a $3,000 to $3,000 3D printer. Yeah, and none of these 3D printed heads actually are like conforming to a specific person's fingers or hands or anything. These are just concepts as far as here's some ideas as far as how you could hold things. I'm a little surprised that they didn't think of a ring option where you would get your finger in the ring and then move it left and right and forward and back, or more of a conformed grip between a pointer finger and a thumb option that would be more ergonomic. Ergonomic technology is more voodoo than it really should be. Even today it's been that way pretty easily. And then the final GameDeveloper.com headline is that Microsoft really wants you to know one-day releases are no longer standard as part of Xbox Game Pass. Right. Default list cleanup still is not working and really shouldn't be run, and very much still in the middle as far as adjusting all of that and moving the fault list cleanup to be its own thing. I'm also contemplating maybe I should just move Gematsu headlines to the front instead of GameDeveloper.com headlines to the front, but I'm not sure about that one either. Then we have some other stories here. Xbox only, digital only Xbox Series X release dates were announced, and I bet is the exact same Gematsu stories once again. So we can just close all of those. I must have run the macro 3 times. And this should bring us to the new games on Steam, which I also screwed that up because I saw a game coming out August 22nd and didn't realize that August 22nd was really only yesterday. I had the wrong days in my head. Gobsmacked. Orbit puzzle. Let's see. So I suppose the unfair question to ask here is, will something like Black Myth Wukong drastically affect the other games released on Steam around it? And almost certainly no, it won't, just because of the long production line even for making a low effort game. Here we have an example of a screenshot that might be slightly intriguing, and then a character who is nowhere as intriguing. And if you actually look at her for a second, she seems to be wearing a red dress in this outfit with red hair, and she's wearing a yellow dress with brown hair in the picture. Yeah. So asset flipped, almost certainly thumbnail. Although in fairness, number one reason I'm not successful on YouTube is because I don't have thumbnails. If all of a sudden I was to just asset flip a bunch of thumbnail art, I probably would do a lot better. I feel like there was another game already called Echo, but I guess you can't copyright Echo. That's one of the things where I could see Valve rightfully being a little bit more cruel and censorious, is to just stop games from having the exact same name as other games, even if it's not a copyright issue, just because it's a name confusion issue. I think we probably have looked at some of these games recently. Yeah, some of these are definitely from like 2019, which we should have looked at them. Because I knee-jerk reaction closed the macro that was opening all the new games on Steam. I then manually did it, and because I manually did it, I then went back too far. So the exact thing I was trying to prevent from happening I caused to happen. Yeah. We really should only be looking at things from 2021. No, August 21st, 2024. It still gets me, frankly, just how far in the future I feel like I am. Which is a silly statement to say. We're in the present, but man, if you'd asked 10-year-old me, would I live to the far off year of 2024? I would have almost certainly said no. But yeah, I guess time flies as you get old, whether you're having fun or not. It just feels so much like a sci-fi time. So effectively what I'm doing is I'm looking, as I'm going through the August 19th and August 20th now games, I'm giving them a second chance, see if they catch my attention. If they're already on the follow list, I'm not going to make a YouTube short around it a second time. May very well accidentally make 2 YouTube shorts on a game back to back, but I'm not too worried about that. And things that came out on the 20th honestly may not have, it would have been pre-Black Myth Wukong, although people knew it was coming, so if people thought it was going to potentially have massive success, they could have tried to make a parody game or something to compete against it. Game Store Simulator. Why is the Game Store Simulator simulation game so much worse looking than all the other simulation games in a soft CG, low polygon style? It's rated very positively, but clearly there's just a lot of enthusiasm that's false enthusiasm around these shopping simulator games. At a certain level, probably could also see myself just not giving YouTube shorts to games that I just don't even want to risk making a YouTube short on. Making 2 YouTube shorts on. Like, some of these games barely fall under the category of deserving to be highlighted once in my initial observation. Of course, that is also the problem here, is that I'm just very quickly looking at these games, and it's pretty easy to make a mistake and overlook things. Of course, I doubt any of my YouTube shorts are making or breaking any games, although I am noticing that I do seem like a lot of people do seem to resonate on the YouTube shorts. And the bigger message I probably should take from that is that people probably would resonate with some level of my content that had my actual voice in it if I could make it more time efficient, considerably more time efficient than I probably ever really could. But yeah, that is probably about the most legitimate argument for shorts, is that it gives people the opportunity to try something out in a small amount of time. Now, weirdly, with that just being said, it is worth pointing out that the guy who runs Game Grumps, Aaron, I think is his name, put out a text post talking about how YouTube clips and playlists full of YouTube clips from Game Grumps are being taken down for just a repetitive content reasons, violations of the rules on YouTube, which, yeah. That may be mostly because they were fan clips and not from the original channel, and so maybe publishing your own clips, it's fine, but also what YouTube thinks of as far as clips is very different from what clips have been in the past, in that somebody would make a clip of a video and upload it as its own separate video. Now YouTube clips means you make a clip using their system and you share it using their system. This might be interesting. I saw somebody playing a text-based Sierra style game. I think it was called Crimson something. And boy, was it just a text-based Sierra style game. Yeah. Not sure if this really is a game or if this is just some asset flipping. I'm gonna give this a chance. It probably doesn't deserve it. But yeah, that definitely, with that news, does make me question as far as if I was to try to make a clips channel, which I'm not really anywhere close to doing that because I don't have any kind of system where I could make clips from my videos. I'd like if somebody did that. This is one of the free games that you should grab. Classic Marathon Infinity. Just because it's a free old game, I guess. It looks decent enough. Yeah, but I have like absolutely no workflow. And I suppose if I wanted to exploit an intern or an underpaid employee's labor, I might have them go through my entire catalog and try and make clips. But none of it would be very natural, and it probably wouldn't be that good. In most of my content, since I'm just talking and not doing anything else, it would either have to be a case of me doing particularly good while playing a game, which is probably not going to be very often, or me saying something very funny, which maybe in the old days I tried more for comedy, a little bit more, but yeah. I never was really creating my content for clips. And even now, I'm not making my content for clips, so I really wouldn't even know what to do to make for clips. I don't think that's too different from most content creators. The difference certainly being Game Grumps has always been going for comedy, so, and they've been making a decent amount of content to find the few sections that are particularly hilarious in the abstract without knowing the full setup. Even like stand-up comedians aren't really embracing clips. And clips can be any length, whereas YouTube Shorts at maximum are a minute. And yeah, I would say, particularly these days, I'm seeing a lot more YouTube shorts that are really poorly edited and just don't actually have a punchline at all. It's just like, we're going to do the setup, the middle, and then we're going to leave you to have to seek out the ending. And maybe that is the strategy as far as YouTube shorts, that they are just best used as a way of teasing somebody into clicking on your channel and seeing more. At a certain point, I think that would ruin YouTube shorts even more than I think they already are ruined. But that may be the right move for content creators. Here's another game that looks like a regular game but is tagged hentai, not safe for work. Almost certainly there is some level of adult content in here. 13 items have been excluded based on my preferences. That's almost certainly 18 plus patches. This one I don't think is particularly terrible as far as of a way they've gone about it. Like, you're still showing a decent amount of cleavage though for something that's not in the adult store in that one screenshot, but everything else seems to be fairly fine. The game itself, I think, is probably nothing though. Like, I don't even know how you actually are shooting. Are you just clicking with your mouse to shoot? Or are you answering questions or what? Yeah. I have no idea. Like, even clicking with your mouse, the game would have to move pretty fast for that to work. Here we have what is a tower defense game, but it's hard to tell that it is that. Still getting a lot of clickers. Now, why did we see that game is a good question to ask, because of the curation. Should have closed that tab in the same way that it should close this doll grabber tab real quick. Which, yeah, I guess because I clicked on all the links manually, the curation didn't have any way it could have acted on that. Here we have Black Myth Heaven. This clearly is trying to create name confusion. Also mentioning Hades. What languages does it support? English and Chinese? Yep. So yeah. If there was one game that was influenced by Black Myth Wukong, we now know it is Black Myth Heaven, a scam looking style of game designed to be, looks like minimal. And here we have Harem Ranch, and again here we have a case where there's nothing visually here that even looks too terrible, and yet it's tagged hentai and sexual content as far as that goes. And you definitely have some more moe style of characters here, younger presenting characters even compared to this character. Which, yeah, that's probably gonna be a surprise to some people. I imagine most people know what harem means, but wouldn't be surprised if there's a few Stardew Valley fans out there that grabbed it not knowing that it actually was something more towards a romance focus. should be somewhat close. Here's one of those resource management games that Heroes of Might and Magic probably should engage more with that and have troopers that would go and pick up resources for you and bring them back. A kiss. I have no idea what that is, but it does intrigue me. Dreamlike Love with Sierra, looks like a visual novel. Is it one that's interesting enough to make a YouTube short on it? I guess so. Just because of the positive reviews. I suppose that is an interesting thought. When I do the follow list cleanup, is there room that makes any sense to make any kind of chart or logging of those games? No, I don't think so. I think that would just be a lot of noise and a lot of data that wouldn't be very useful. I don't think it's very informative or helpful for me to say here's a bunch of games that never gained any relevancy because they didn't have at least 30 user reviews in 30 days, or never or reviewed poorly in 30 days. Multiplication and Mayhem. Maybe this is a game, probably not. And I'm feeling the need to go to the bathroom, so I'm gonna try and hurry up and finish this stream. Weirdly, this stream has gone long. Is that because I opened way too many links? Probably. Here we have another game that is trying to sell on lewdness. It may also just be the case that we are finally starting to approach a point where more news is happening. But yeah, I feel like this went long compared to the most recent of streams, but we're still not hitting anywhere close to the 3 or 4 hour streams. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this. The end of show title here is actually accurate this time. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.